book of Daniel 11, chapter 11, and we're going to pick up with verse 25, which tells us, "And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south." So we're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes now making war against the current king of the south, who was Ptolemy Philometor of Egypt. "And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle, and with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him." In other words, plots and false intelligence, etc., will be used to defeat Ptolemy Philometor. Okay, so verse 25 is telling us that Antiochus Epiphanes has decided to make war against Egypt yet again. So the king of the north invades the king of the south. Verse 26, "Yea, they that feed the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain." So that sounds like it's talking about deceit and treason within the ranks of Ptolemy Philometor. So let's continue, verse 27. "And both of these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the appointed time." In other words, these two kings are going to try to come to peaceable terms, but they will be lying to each other at the conference table, and it's just not going to work. So in other words, and this continuing conflict between the king of the north and the king of the south is going to go on until the appointed time. What's the appointed time? That is the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, because all these events that began with the Judahites being at odds with each other, because there was a civil war instigated by the Greeks that instigated many of the Judahites to adopt Greek customs. So the pro-Greek Judahites then began to make war internally against the Maccabees, who were the Mosaic Judahites. So we had a situation of civil war going on among Judah. Okay? Verse 28. "Then shall he return into his land with great riches," that is, the king of the north will return to his land, "and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land." In other words, he is going to now conspire, he's going to use connivances and trickery to destroy Judah, to destroy the land of Judah. And this is talking about more intrigue and causing more mischief among the Judahites, setting one faction against the other. "And at the appointed time, let me go back to verse 28. "And then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land." So back to Syria, with Jerusalem as his part-time home base, because he was in and out of Syria and Jerusalem constantly at this point in time. Now verse 29. "At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south." So there's another invasion of the south, of the king of the south. "But it shall not be as the former or as the latter, for the ships of Chittim shall come against him." So here we're being told that Antiochus Epiphanes invades Egypt yet again. However, the ships of Chittim intervene to halt the assault. And what this is talking about is that the Romans actually sent a fleet to intervene on behalf of Egypt, and they stopped Antiochus Epiphanes about 7 miles outside of Alexandria and forced him to turn back. So now Antiochus Epiphanes twice now has incurred the wrath of the Romans by his activities. So what does he do now? He goes back to Jerusalem. Verse 29, "At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter, for the ships of Chittim shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return, that is, go back to Jerusalem, and have indignation against the holy covenant. So he takes his frustration and his anger out upon the people of Judah. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. In other words, he will make deals, secret treaties, with the anti-Judaic or anti-Mosaic faction that now exists in Jerusalem. Verse 31. In fact, when he came back, it's recorded that he slew 40,000 Judahites upon his return to Jerusalem. This is how angry he was at the negative turn of events that he found in Egypt this last time. Verse 31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. And this is the pollution of the sanctuary, is when he began to sacrifice pigs on the altar of Judah. And then he shall take away the daily sacrifice. So he put an end to the ritual sacrifices of the Levitical priesthood. So this is how much Antiochus Epiphanes interfered in the religious and cultural life of the people of Judah. So he was an abomination. That's why he's an abomination. And they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So he was a type of Antichrist, because he made war against the people of Judah, and he messed and tried to change our customs, as Antichrist is always doing. Verse 32. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. In other words, he's going to continue to be on the side of the traitor Judahites and make war against the Maccabees. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. These are the Maccabees. The Maccabees are the ones who rebelled against Antiochus Epiphanes and tried to reinstitute the laws of Moses. Verse 33. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. And the Maccabees began a loyal uprising against Antiochus Epiphanes. And among these loyal people, there were a great many soldiers. And the people that followed, the people who did not want to adopt Greek customs, followed the Maccabees. So let me start this verse again. And they that understand among the people, that is, the Judahites that have understanding, shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. The Maccabees made war against the Greeks for many years, but ultimately they were defeated. That's what we're being told here. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Now, in my opinion, this is the beginning of the group we know today as the Pharisees, who pretended to be loyal to the Mosaic law, but were in fact making their own law, and they continue to do the same thing even in the days of Jesus Christ when they were making their own law. So here we have the beginnings of this group called the Pharisees, who by deception pretended to be of loyal stock, but were in fact traitors to Judah. Verse 35. And some of them understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Again, this appointed time is the destruction of the temple. So what we're being told here, and you have to understand that the King James translators had no idea what all this is about. They had no idea of the history, the actual history of the conflict between the Greeks and the Egyptians and Roman intervention. They had a general idea, but they could not possibly have known that Daniel 11 is talking about these very specific events. So this is all very generally stated because the King James translators could not have really understood what was going on. So let me reread this verse 35. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end. So what's being told here is there is the loyal faction of Judah maintained itself until the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And you had these competing factions, the loyal Judahites and the Pharisees, from this point forward. Verse 36. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. So, in other words, Antiochus Epiphanes glorified himself in a kind of self-idol worship, and stood opposed to Yahweh, God of Israel. Verse 37. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, so he disregarded even his Greek heritage, nor the desire of women, which apparently means either he became homosexual or he was so bent on power that he lost his natural desire for women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. So we're talking about self-worship here. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. What's that? The God of war. He became so warlike, and he always was, really. It's just his true nature, showed furiously here. And a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. So we're talking about paganism here, but not the paganism of the Greeks, but Baal worship of the Canaanites and the Pharisees. Verse 39. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange god. In other words, he adopted local gods, non-Israelite gods, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. So in other words, he imposed Baal worship, or the worship of the synagogue of Satan, the Jews as we know them today, whose ancestors are indeed the Pharisees. So, verse 40, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. So now Egypt invades Antiochus Epiphanes, and then the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind. He counterattacks with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. So we're talking about the last great battle here in verses 40 through 42 between the king of the north and the king of the south. Let's continue. He shall enter also into the glorious land, back into Palestine, Judah, land of Judah, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. So it's telling us he's starting to lose his power. The people of Edom and Moab now are no longer in his domain or no longer his concern. Verse 42. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So the reason why he didn't attack Edom and Moab and Ammon was because they had been his allies most of the time against Egypt. Verse 43. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. So I think it's telling us here that his empire, this last invasion of Egypt, will go to the borders of Libya and Ethiopia. Verse 44. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many, it says here. It uses make instead of take. So What's the tidings out of the east and out of the north? Well, the rumblings from the east were from the Parthians, who were the allies of the loyal Judahites. The Parthians are in fact descendants of the tribe of Judah. The kingdom of Parthia was led by Levitical priests. In fact, these were the Magi. They were the Magi that came back to Judah to bless Christ at his birth. So then these Parthians were opposed to Antiochus Epiphanes because they were pro-Judah, and the Romans from the north were opposed to Antiochus Epiphanes because he was a renegade who needed to be conquered. So there was trouble coming from the north and from the east, and his demise is very soon, which is given in verse 45. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. His last stronghold will have been in the area of Jerusalem between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So this very difficult chapter 11 of the book of Daniel covers this space of time between the invasion of Alexander the Great. It talks about Alexander the Great conquering the last Medo-Persian king, and then his successors dividing into 4 different camps, ruling 4 different areas. The struggles between and among these 4 different generals and their successors, and the coming of the Romans into Judea. This is all covered in this 11th chapter of Daniel. I just want to make one more point, that in the book of Antiquities by Josephus, he talks about a time when Alexander the Great came to Judah in order to subdue Judah. But what happened was the high priest showed Alexander the Great a copy of the book of Daniel. And when he read the book of Daniel, he realized that he himself was the king of Grecia, prophesied in Daniel. So, having read this prophecy and realizing that he himself was the king of Grecia, prophesied, that he had tremendous respect for the holy book that he was just shown, and he decided not to subdue the kingdom of Judah and left the Judahites alone, and went up to Phoenicia and defeated the king of Tyre. So the very fact that the Bible was shown, the Old Testament was shown to Alexander the Great, caused him to have so much reverence for the prophecy that he decided not to invade Judah. But that was done later by one of his successors. So this is a very fascinating chapter of Daniel. It is very historical. And it also presages the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, because the events that the division among the Judahites at this time eventually led to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, when in fact the Romans, in the book of Romans, chapter 16, I believe it's verse 20, where Paul prophesies that the descendants of the Romans would come and destroy the temple. And those Romans, of course, were descendants of Zerah Judah, who had escaped from Egypt around 1500 BC. They were Israelites who had never been part of the Exodus experience, but in fact had gone across the Mediterranean Sea, left the captivity of Egypt, founded Troy and Rome. These Romans, these were in fact Israelites. Titus, the Roman general, was in fact an Israelite, and that's why Paul said that you, Israelites of the dispersion, shall come back and destroy the temple. So we have all kinds of evidence that these prophecies are really accurate once you understand the historical facts of the situation. And as I said earlier, the King James translators could not have known the details of this history. And so I'm going to conclude today's lesson just to show you how accurate the Bible is in terms of prophecy. And these prophecies, properly understood, especially from the Christian identity point of view, show how accurate the Bible is as a history book and as a prophecy book. Thank you.